Welcome to Business of Being Black with Tammi Mack. I'm Dominique DePrima, filling in for Tammi Mack today. So excited to be here because we are counting down the top 10 stories of 2021. And that is a wide range of stories. So sit back, buckle up, and get ready for an exciting show about what has been a truly insane year. Please welcome my co-host, the co-founder of the Anti-Racism Coalition Kentucky, Dr. O.J. Oleka, political analyst Ed Sanders, and comedian and filmmaker Alicia Cooper. All right, let's get started counting down these top 10 stories of 2021. Will and Jada. Will Smith and Jada Pinkett Smith had a very open conversation about their relationship and all the layers of that. And that, of course, went very viral. Jada confessed to having an entanglement with singer August Alsina. Take a look.
Yeah, and then I got into an entanglement with August. That's what I said.
An entanglement?
Yes. Yes.
A relationship?
Yes, it was a relationship. Absolutely.
Okay, so let's talk about it. What are your thoughts about what we learned about Will and Jada's relationship? You know what, Alicia, I'm going to pick on Ed and OJ, Dr. Oleka, tonight, because they always try to dip out when we talk about marriage and relationships. So we'll start with you, Ed Sanders. What was this too much information? How did you feel about this conversation?
Probably was, but to be honest, Will and Jada are, a very high profile couple. I don't think any one of us would say that we're not proud of their careers and what they've been able to accomplish. So yeah, it's newsworthy, but you hate to see something like that play out in the public eye, especially when there's kids involved. It's an interesting take on relationships, the openness of it. I don't know how many other people are really comfortable with that, but
OJ, Dr. Oleka, I mean, I know you can fall back on your conservative views here, but did entanglements, do you think that conversation caused problems in some marriages across the country?
Well, I mean, I think the whole situation is a problem in itself. I don't think that there's any good for either Will and Jada for their marriage to have this conversation openly and publicly for a lot of reasons. But yeah, an entanglement is bad for a marriage. I hope that's not a spoiler for some folks who are married out there. That's not good for your marriage. Don't get entangled with other people who are not your spouse. Don't get in relationships. Yes, it's too much information. It's all bad.
Alicia, did you see there was a petition online? It's got about 10,000 signatures. It's saying, stop interviewing Will and Jada. We don't want to hear any more about their marriage. Agree, disagree? You have a different take.
Yeah, I saw the petition and I laughed. I was like, you don't have to do a petition. Just turn them off. Like, maybe there's some people who want to hear about their marriage. Maybe there's some people who's learning from what they go through. So I think that's unfair to do a petition because you don't like it. You don't have to listen, And I feel like with Will and Jada, I listened to Will's audio book, and all I can say is they're different. That is a different couple and a different family. I've never seen people like them. So, I'm not surprised that she had an entanglement with August. I just would have thought it would have been in August, but I think it was an entanglement in October. But my thing is that was none of our business, but because she wanted to let us in, I think she's relatable. A lot of people have had entanglements in their marriage. These aren't the first couple to ever have to deal with something like this. And I just thought it was funny that Will kept his stuff out. Because that's not, I know y'all don't think Will didn't have any entanglements, but his stuff managed to stay out of the news media, and it looked like it was all Jada. So that was the part that was interesting to me. And to each his own. It's working for them. They've been married longer than most Hollywood couples. So whatever they're doing seems to be working out, and they understand it, and they understand each other, and that's really all that matters.
Yeah, it's working for them. Okay, well, let's go to number 9 on the list. Critical race theory. It became a hot topic of debate when discussing what children learn about in school. Even though critical race theory is not taught in elementary school or high school, it became one of our hottest topics of the year. And we'll pivot to you, Dr. O.J. Oleka, because this has been a big talking point in the Republican playbook this year.
Well, I think it's more than a talking point, and Virginia showed us that. Now, look, critical race theory is defined by a lot of people in the media and on the political scene in a lot of different ways. Again, I have a PhD. It was something that we looked at as a framework in my doctoral program, so I'm very familiar with it. But the bottom line is this: people of all races and backgrounds don't like the idea of their kids in elementary, middle, or high school learning that they shouldn't like themselves because of what they look like. Again, that can be considered critical race theory. It cannot be. That really is beside the point. What we knew and what we know now is that in a political context, that phrase, critical race theory, is one that is going to hurt Democrats in 2022. It hurt them in Virginia in 2021. And it's something that animates the Republicans on the right.
Ed, I know you have a clap back on this.
Interesting.
Oh, go ahead, Alicia.
It's very interesting how now that other people's kids might feel badly about something that's an issue. Nobody had a problem when little black kids were being taught to feel badly about themselves for hundreds of years. But now if our kids are old enough to go through it, other people's kids are old enough to read about it. And I don't see why, like we said, there's not even being taught in schools. So what you're talking about is not teaching history. And that's really unfortunate and unfair. Now, why would a little white kid think they're bad because the slavery existed? Like, y'all want to tell us we weren't slaves, but y'all weren't slave owners. So why would this little 7-year-old kid feel bad about something they weren't even a part of? What they're learning is history and the true meaning of history. So I don't understand why that should be a problem.
Well, it is interesting, Alicia, because we always hear conservatives talking about how liberals or progressives are snowflakes and they're so fragile. And what you're telling me now is that learning 360 degrees of our actual history is something that white children are too fragile to endure. I don't buy it. To me, it's a false argument because there isn't even critical race theory in schools. And what I worry about is censorship. But Ed, you're a dad. I mean, it's fair to say that parents should have some input on what their kids are taught, right?
Sure. I mean, absolutely you should. But I think what Alicia spoke to is exactly right on this issue. When you look at this discussion on critical race theory, it really is more about motivating a political base. This isn't a real issue, right? It's not being taught in that many schools to be that much of an issue, but it's a talking point. And you saw that it was used politically in Virginia. To OJ's point, it's going to be used again in the midterms to wild success. The history that we learned is that, at any point where this Southern conservative base can activate around race, they can drive their vote out, and they'll do whatever they can to do that. Today's iteration is just critical race theory, but it's really sort of a false argument.
Hey, I love this, by the way.
I would be upset.
Just quick, because I want to squeeze in one more in our countdown before we move on. Go ahead, Alicia.
I would be upset if I was on the right, realizing that they're using race as a cudgel. You should be offended that they're going to sit up here and pretend that race is an issue for this stuff. It's actually racism is what they're doing. And I wouldn't feel good about that if I was on the right, knowing that they're using race as a talking point to win elections because they know that racism and racial bias wins.
Well, absolutely. We're going to do really quick takes here on this one. It's our number 8 topic. I love this. I get to do a New Year's countdown. After serving 3 years in prison, Bill Cosby was released on Wednesday, June 30th. His conviction was overturned, and that was done by Pennsylvania's highest court. I'm going right to you, Alicia. You're a comic. Was this a good thing? Was it a bad thing? Did he serve enough time? Was this a setback for the Me Too movement?
Well, I mean, what they actually did was the right thing because he spoke because he was given they told they would never unseal his documents. So there's some things that he told and he did that because of what he was promised by the DA at the time. You can't then go back and renege on an agreement. That breaks down the whole system of law. So this wasn't saying he was innocent or that he didn't deserve to do prison time. This was saying that they broke a law in order to get him in jail. You cannot do that. That would make people not testify because they were told they were going to give some sort of they were going to be given some sort of benefit to testifying. They wouldn't do that if you're going to then turn around and go, I got your psycho boo boo. Now you're going to jail. You have to live up to the things that you promise people legally. And that's what happened with Bill Cosby's situation.
Dr. O.J. Oleka, should Bill Cosby still be in jail?
Well, I mean, if you're talking about whether or not he committed those crimes, I think his testimony, in fact, that Alicia was talking about that was unsealed, demonstrated that he did. This is more of a legal technicality. It is not about his innocence. I don't think it stops the Me Too movement or sets it back, but it certainly is a problem that those women that he committed those crimes against don't get their full justice.
Yeah, a lot of controversy around this case with Bill Cosby. Ed Sanders, where do you fall on it?
When I think of Bill, I think of, the Cosby Show. I think of a different world, and I think about the influence that he had as a philanthropist. I think throughout this whole process, I lament, the loss of his public stance. Different world was one of the real reasons I went to Howard University as an undergrad. And so as this unfolded, it brings up a lot of emotion where, you hate to see this. As far as the Me Too movement, I don't think this does anything to set that back. Look, I think in terms of the conversation, we're seeing more women coming forward, standing strong, having the conversation about, protecting their privacy, protecting their own bodies, and they should. I don't think Cosby getting out of jail does anything to hurt that.
Okay, well, again, people are going to be divided, but just because Cosby did or did not do the crime doesn't mean that his contribution is now erased from the culture, for sure. I want you to stay right here. We've got the rest of our top 10 stories of 2021, our countdown coming up. I'm Dominique DePrima in for Tammi Mack on Fox Soul TV. Welcome to Business of Being Black with Tammi Mack. I'm Dominique DePrima, filling in for Tammi Mack. And if you're just joining us, we are counting down the top 10 stories of 2021 with our regular crew here. And we are up to story number 7. All this year, the Milwaukee Bucks won the NBA championship. Okay, it was their first in 50 years. The Tampa Bay Bucks won the Super Bowl. That was their first since 2002. And that gave Tom Brady his 7th Super Bowl win. The Atlanta Braves won the World Series. That was their first since 1995. Which championship was most impressive? I'm going to Ed Sanders because he's just a sports fanatic of our crew.
I don't think you can not say that Tom Brady winning the 7th Super Bowl is not the best there. I think that's something that you won't see certainly in our lifetime. But I'm surprised you didn't throw the Chicago Sky and our good friend Candace Parker going back home to Chicago and winning the WNBA championship in that mix. That was
You're looking out, Ed. What about you, Alicia? What impressed you most of these victories?
You know what? I'm not a fan of any of those 3 teams, but I will have to agree with Ed and say Tom Brady. But he needs an asterisk beside his with that whole deflate gate thing. So, yeah, it would have to be Tom.
Wow. Okay. Going with Tom Brady. And Dr. O.J. Oleka?
As a team accomplishment, I'm going to say the Milwaukee Bucks, because if you look at what that city and that community has been through over the past couple of years, and Giannis Antetokounmpo winning the MVP, they came back from down 2-0 in the finals. It's a pretty remarkable team accomplishment, so I'm going to give my nod to them.
Savor this moment. I agree with Dr. O.J. Oleka. A 50-year drought in anything is worthy of a massive celebration. I hope all of you are just ending some kind of drought in your own life. So I'm definitely going with Milwaukee on that. On January 20th, Kamala Harris was sworn in as Vice President of the United States, the first Black woman, the first Asian American woman, the first woman of any kind ever to hold that title. What are your thoughts on this accomplishment? Let's talk about what this means. Let's go woman to woman. Alicia, we're starting with you.
Yes, that's a big deal, but then that opens herself up to everything. She is open to racism. She's open to sexism. She's open to every ism because she's everything, Indian, Asian, so she's going to get all the different isms from every group. But I think she's doing a pretty good job. I mean, no woman has ever had this position before, so there's no precedent that's been set. We don't see a lot of her, which I don't know exactly what the inner workings are, but it's a big deal to have a woman of color as the first female VP. And that's what it means to me. It means that there's opportunities and little girls of color can see themselves and see that there's no limit to what they can become.
Dr. OJ, I know you must feel torn because I know you're big on the anti-racist stuff, but at the same time, you are a Republican, and Republicans seem to be hell-bent on just deteriorating and undermining Vice President Kamala Harris as much as possible right now so that she would not be a viable presidential candidate.
Well, I don't. Well, look, let me start with the positive things first. It certainly is a historic accomplishment for former Senator Kamala Harris, now be Vice President Kamala Harris. We were talking about droughts before. 50 years is a long time. Forever is also a long time. And that's the drought that we had before. As you mentioned, a woman was vice president, an African-American was vice president, an Asian-American was vice president. She did all those things by herself, by her very personage. And that's pretty remarkable. That is an accomplishment, and she should absolutely be warranted for that historic achievement. That said, Republicans don't really have that difficult of a job for making Kamala Harris not a strong candidate for the presidency in the future, because while she does suffer a lot of isms, good at her job ism is not one that she suffers. She is not good at politics at the national stage. You don't have to ask me, ask all the Democrats in the White House, in her own office, who were leaking all this information about how she apparently isn't very strong in terms of her own abilities. You can look at each interview that she does. She struggles with those. The White House gave her all the tough assignments, from voting rights, which was always going to be hard, immigration was going to be hard, and for whatever reason, they decided they were going to give them to her, and she has not been successful. So I would have two perspectives on this as a Republican. One, it's not hard to make Kamala Harris look like she's not doing her job well, because she's not. But then two, for all the Democrats and the progressives out there, ask yourself this question. Why is Joe Biden and the Democrats giving this black woman all the assignments that nobody could get done? I think that's a question you all need to figure out for yourselves.
I mean, I want to point out a small contradiction, Dr. O.J. Aleka. You just slammed her for not being able to solve problems that no one in the history of this country has ever been able to solve. So, okay. And how do we know for sure those are Republicans that are leaking, or Democrats that are leaking, and not Republicans just placing things in the press? We don't know. Ed Sanders, you've worked on a lot of political campaigns as a policy analyst and as an aide. Is it fair to say that she's not doing a good job? I mean, do vice presidents ever have a high profile? Do they ever have their accomplishments highlighted? Or is this just a fail on her part?
I think, vice presidency is like the most powerful, powerless person in DC, right? There is no actual power in the seat. I think what we find frustrating with this administration, particularly Joe Biden, is we watched how Barack Obama worked closely with Joe Biden, how integral Biden was in Obama's administration. And you would expect that as president that he would have done the same with his vice president. What's really clear is that there's sort of a Washington, D.C. two-step going on, and that Kamala is on the outs with the Biden team, whether that's, internal staffing or from the president himself. It's really clear that they are not tracking together. And, that lack of cohesion, I think, is going to harm them in the long run. I don't think that Biden's popularity is strong enough to get him reelected. I think it's a bad choice on his part. One of the reasons he selected then Senator Harris as a running mate was because she could activate the base. To set her on the sideline now just seems to be counterproductive. And I think we're seeing that with all of the Build Back Better not being able to get through. I don't know that Biden is going to be any stronger over the next 2 years.
Well, I mean, there has to be a real concern about her outshining him. She's photogenic. She's super smart. She is good at her job, Dr. Oleka. She was good as California Attorney General. She was great as a senator. And I think she has been the victim of a prolonged smear campaign during the election cycle and now after the election cycle. I just want to make a plea to all of the people, Black people in the press, especially Black women, stop jumping on the bandwagon and criticizing her for every little thing. She's supposed to push back on Charlemagne the God when he disses the president. Isn't it the vice president's job to be the protector and watchdog over the president? I feel like she gets treated like a Black woman. That's what I feel like. Dr. OJ, I know you probably have some pushback on that.
Well, I actually don't have a ton of pushback on that, to be honest. I mean, it is her job to defend the president. I think if you have a particular interest in seeing people succeed based on whatever their identity is, and you're in the media, you've got an opportunity to do so. Is that bias. Everyone's got bias, so people can make their own determinations. I do want to make this point, though, and I may be wrong on this. I don't think that I am. I think she's the first vice president, maybe since Dan Quayle, but if you take him out, since Harry Truman or something like that in the 1940s, where she has less Washington experience than the president. The reason why that matters, to Ed's point, is because you don't really need the vice president if they don't offer Washington experience if you've got it yourself. So I don't think the Biden team really set her up for success, which again, being a woman, being a minority, being both of those things, we know that if you aren't set up for success, it's a lot harder to have it.
Well, we've got a lot more to cover in our countdown of the top 10 biggest stories of 2021. Can you guess what the rest are? Well, stay with us and we will let you know. Welcome back. We are counting down the top 10 stories of 2021, according to Business of Being Black with Tammi Mack. I'm Dominique DePrima in for Tammi Mack. And now let's go to story number 5. Shakira Richardson was banned from the Olympic competition because of a positive cannabis test. And the United States Olympic team ended up, well, actually the entire world of Olympics ended up performing with no fans in the stands. Now we've got some hindsight on this whole situation. What are your reflections on the Olympics in general and on the sad story of Shakira Richardson in particular? And let's start with you, Dr. O.J. Aleka.
Well, it is sad that she didn't get to compete. When we talked about this earlier in the year, we certainly wanted her to have a second chance. Look, I believe that there was an opportunity for her to learn from this and to get back on the track, to get back in the Olympics. That would be fantastic. I think with the Olympics as a whole, that event is never good without any spectators, as we certainly experienced. That's a big part of it. Fans and supporters of their country get to go and watch the Olympics compete. And of course, obviously, there was the story of Simone Biles having to pull out. So there were a lot of challenges that came with this Olympic season. I think ultimately it was good that it happened because I know Japan put in a lot of work to make this Olympics happen. I had the opportunity to go to Japan in November of 2019. Of course, this Olympics was supposed to be in summer 2020. We knew that it couldn't be. And there's a lot of excitement. There's a lot of fanfare and a lot of pride from the country to be able to do it. So I'm glad that they got to be able to. I hate it for Simone Biles in terms of her illustrious career, for Shakira Richardson, and the fact that she had to step back and the fact that there were no fans.
Yeah, I mean, I love that Shakira Richardson caught the imagination of our nation and the world. We were rooting for her, you know, the loss of her mom and just her struggles in life. I think it was a disappointment that she continued to not run well after the Olympics. And I also think it pointed out to many of us that cannabis needs to be erased from the controlled substances for athletes in international competition. At least that's my perspective. I think it should be decriminalized worldwide. Your take on that, Ed?
I don't know that I agree with that, but in terms of Shakira, when I think about the Summer Olympics, I always look forward to the Summer Olympics because it's this opportunity to see Black excellence on a world stage. Whether it's the Americans or the Jamaican track team, you get to see African descended people in the diaspora performing at a high level. And I look forward to it. Disappointment is probably the emotion or the sentiment that I felt with regards to Shakira. It's just one of those things. Look, smoking cannabis in the lead up to your Olympic run, whatever the reason, there are going to be some consequences, and I'm sure that she knew that smoking weed would cost her that, and for whatever reason, if it was to help cope with the death of her was it her mother or grandmother, even still, you put so much in as an Olympic athlete, you hate to see that. I agree with OJ on Simone Biles. I thought it was a tragic ending to her career. I hope when I look back at the Olympics, I don't feel like the American stories that were told are the best stories. And those are the two that jump out.
I'm going to have to agree to disagree with you on that, Ed, because even though I was sad that we didn't get to see Simone make history as a gymnast, she made history as an activist. standing up for people with mental illness, which is a lot of people right now in the middle of this pandemic, and certainly a lot of people who are in the public eye, whether it's in entertainment or athletics. I thought what she did was heroic. And I certainly thought when she followed that up by testifying against the U.S. Gymnastic Committee and the doctor who molested all those young women, I just think that her story ended heroically, even if it didn't have the athletic finish that we were looking for. Alicia, talk to me about the Olympics in general. You know, I also agree with OJ, by the way, that I'm glad we didn't cancel, because those athletes do put in so much work. And if we cancel, that's it for them in many cases. In many cases, it will be too late for them to do it in another 4 years. What's your take looking back on the Olympics and on the story of Shakira and Simone?
Yes, I'm glad they didn't cancel it, because like you said, there's a finite amount of time for these athletes to do what they do, and pushing it back, age has never been a positive thing for athletics. So I'm glad that they did not do that and they went forward with it. But as far as Shakira Richardson, it's just such a sad situation. This young lady is so gifted, so talented. She's in an elite level that makes it to the Olympics. And I just feel like anybody working that hard should not trip themselves up at the finish line. Get that list of banned substances that we all can read, and do not do anything on that list. Alcohol was not on that list. Go get drunk. We cannot afford for you to get this far and trip at the finish line. Do something else that's legal that can help you. Get some white wine. There's other things that'll calm your anxieties.
Go to a comedy show. Go see Alicia Cooper.
Yeah, come
Exactly.
laugh with us. It's comic. So yeah, just stay off the banned substances list. There's some things you can do that aren't on that list that'll help you out. I'm still saddened that I didn't get to see her run. But I think she still has a lot left in the tank, and I'm looking forward to what her future holds. She's still a young lady.
Sex isn't a banned substance, is it? I'm just saying. It has to be one of the top stories of 2021 is still the pandemic, right? It's been a stubborn one. Okay, Alicia, stop. Between the first the Delta variant, now we're on Omicron, Amarion. We are still deep in this pandemic. It seems like it's never going to end. Why are we still in this position, Ed?
Well, it has a lot to do with the vaccination rate. I think we are still going to see hospitalizations at a high clip among the unvaccinated, right? That's who's going into the hospital now. I think, as a country, I feel like we're moving past this, right? Where, look, the variants are spreading, like Omicron is spreading at a wild clip. And so you're seeing more and more people get it, every day at this point. In short order, I feel like it will have run through the population. The only hope for folks that aren't vaccinated is that you don't have a bad spin with it. You can stand on the mountain and just tell people, get vaccinated. If you think you've got underlying conditions, get vaccinated. If you can sustain a hospital stay and that much time off of work, take your chances. But to everyone listening, I would say go get vaccinated if you're not, and do what you can to not catch this thing. It's spreading like wildfire right now.
Yeah. Dr. OJ Aleka, do you think we'll ever come out of COVID, or are we just going to be one variant after another forever? Is it the new common cold, or are we almost to the other side of the mountain?
Well, I want to be careful here because obviously COVID-19 is a very deadly disease. It is a coronavirus, though. And to your point, the common cold is a coronavirus. What I hope happens is that the new variants that come about, as again, with coronaviruses, there will always be variants. It is a mutating virus. The hope is that the virus, as it mutates, will become less deadly. The symptoms will not be as lethal or as painful in terms of hospitalizations. Because again, people used to get colds all the time and go about their day. They'd go run outside, they'd go work out, they would go to work. Now, I hope some of those things, people, if they're able to change their behavior a little bit, if you're sick and you don't have to be around people, regardless of that sickness, that you decide not to do that. But I think it depends, quite frankly, for a lot of folks psychologically. For a lot of people, COVID-19 and the pandemic it's something now that is just too difficult for them to decide to get over, in the sense that if they've gotten the vaccination, they've gotten a booster, they wear a mask everywhere, they've had COVID-19, you're pretty well inoculated as much as you can be. So you should go out there and live your life. But if policies or different people decide that they want the pandemic to continue to be pandemic as opposed to an endemic, again, to Ed's point, which is focused explicitly on folks who are not vaccinated, they get the worst of this thing now, then that's going to be on them. But I think we can turn the corner. Again, my family, we've gotten vaccinated. We made that decision. We got the booster, made that decision as well. And so we're living our lives.
Yeah. Well, I've gotten vaccinated, and I had mixed feelings about the booster because I feel like we need to share with other countries before we run back and get a third and a fourth shot. When you have entire continents that have 7% vaccination rate, it doesn't seem fair. And it also doesn't seem smart, because we will never end this COVID pandemic until there is widespread immunity, not just in the United States. People fly around the world. So I really think we're going to have to figure out how to share our wealth. Alicia, your take?
Yeah, I mean, this thing just keeps mutating. Every time you look at something else, and it makes me paranoid. I'm on a cruise ship right now. Every morning I wake up thinking I got it. I'm like, ooh, I'm hot. Ooh, I'm sweaty. Ooh, so it makes you start feeling, I'm like, oh Lord, what's this new variant? Is it the lambda, and the omega move? I'm just looking around. I'm thinking I have everything under the sun. So I've gotten my booster. So I'm sorry, Dominique, I ain't waiting for the third world countries. I went and got my Jada. But I'm like, save yourself. So yeah, but yeah, I would tell everybody to get boosted, because even the first couple of shots start to wear off over a while. It's going to be like the flu shot. You're going to need these boosters, I believe, annually.
All right. Well, when we continue this conversation, we will have, yes, the top 3 stories of 2021 straight ahead on Fox Soul TV. We are counting down the top 10 stories of 2021, and we are at number 3. Joining me, of course, comedian, filmmaker Alicia Cooper, political analyst Ed Sanders, and the founder of the Anti-Racist Coalition of Kentucky, O.J. Oleka, Dr. O.J. Oleka, I should say. Story number 3, of course, the murder of George Floyd sparked the biggest anti-racist movement worldwide, the racial justice movement in every continent. The man who murdered George Floyd, Derek Chauvin, was found guilty of that murder. He was sentenced to 22 and a half years in federal prison. And let's talk about it. What are your thoughts on the Chauvin sentencing? What does it change? How has the nation changed as a result of this whole experience, from George Floyd's murder all the way through this trial? And I'm going to go to you, Ed Sanders.
I think, as we talked about critical race theory, we talked about, how that issue would gin up, supporters on the right. There's nothing that gets that base more amped up than dealing with issues of race. As George Floyd was murdered, and then the subsequent protests throughout the world, frankly, I found myself just watching, the news and just in awestruck, like, wow, I was not expecting that. And still find a lot of surprise in this country and countries around the world for their stand in solidarity. And it's one of these things where, I think for me, at times, I am upset at the world, right? And I'll think about critical race theory, and that'll have me upset. And then you see the response to George Floyd, and you see how, that there is hope for this country, that there is a better side to this country. And that's what I take from George Floyd this year.
Well, Dr. Oleka, we've talked a lot about this in terms of racism, in terms of policing, and in terms of whether these protests can turn into policy. Do you think we've seen any real change?
Oh, well, absolutely. I think we've seen real change. It is unfortunate that it took the death of George Floyd for us to get there on some of these really important issues, but we certainly have. I can speak to Kentucky specifically. Again, the coalition that I helped found with a friend of mine who's on the opposite end of the political spectrum we helped get some legislation passed at the state level that I think has been really beneficial for the Black community. It was a commission on race and access to opportunity to study these issues at the state level. We got some sentencing reforms done. We also got some financial resources going to Black communities specifically. In Kentucky, there was a lot of work that got done. On the national level, you have the National Commission on the Social Status of Black Men and Boys that was passed through Congress, signed by President Trump. So there were a lot of ways, I think, where this really opened up the eyes politically for folks, but also in business and in the business community, a lot of resources going towards the Black community. So my hope is that this can be sustained long term, that the protests and the advocacy can turn into action, that can turn into sustained success.
Yeah, I think that's right. And Alicia Cooper, I feel like this whole experience with George Floyd, the Chauvin trial, even the Kim Potter verdict, the things that we're seeing happening now have impacted Hollywood and entertainment more than I anticipated. Agree, disagree? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it just shone a global light on what's been happening in America. And yes, it has taken, everything is changing in Hollywood, from behind the scenes casting and front of the camera casting. We're in the equation now. And even the subject matters are deeper. You know, when Colin Kaepernick took his stance, everybody that was against him thought that he was just being grandiose, and that he was just trying to cover up for the fact that he threw a couple bad passes. It was very bizarre why they jumped to the conclusions that they jumped to about what Colin Kaepernick was saying. After that George Floyd video came out, those same people really shut their mouths. You know, they got to see front and center that this is a real issue. And then to have Chauvin really recently admit that he knew he was killing that man, and he knew he was suffocating that man when he kept his knee on his neck, which we already knew. But to hear it come out of his mouth, there's no denying that there's a problem with policing. There's a problem with the justice system. And now other countries know what's happening right here in the U.S. When the U.S. wants to tell other countries how to handle their business, other countries are like, yeah, you might want to clean up your own backyard. So a lot of things came out of the George Floyd. I want to see the George Floyd Policing Act passed, but there's still been a lot of progress made since, unfortunately, it was at the expense of Mr. Floyd. But, you know, things are changing, and they're changing for the better.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think we don't see a lot of the change, or maybe we don't pay attention to it because it's happening on the city, county, and state level more than the national level. I do want to point out that there's been a backlash, some would call it a white lash, where because of pandemic related violence, mental health outbreaks, and the trend line that we're seeing with homicides, that many organizations are using this as an excuse to try to scare people into going back to the old ways of policing, the old police budgets, and the old sort of Ronald Reagan law and order racist Republican playbook. I hope that doesn't work. I hope we continue to move forward with getting the right experts to respond to the right kinds of situations, homeless experts to respond to the homeless, mental health experts to respond to mental health situations, and continuing to look at de-escalation and humane models of policing that could really get us to where we need to be with our law enforcement in this country. That's my prayer for the end of this year. Look, after 19 years, 10 months, and a tumultuous exit, the last U.S. military troops left Afghanistan on August 30th, ending the longest war in the history of the United States. Let's talk about not only the war being over, but the entire war itself. Maybe we emphasize a little too much on the exit and not the footprint, the ginormous footprint on American history. Alicia, let's start with you. There's been a lot of talk about this. I'm sure a lot of jokes about it too. What are your feelings?
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that the troops are out of Afghanistan. But I mean, if you think about even before that, George W. Bush was the president at the time. He wasn't even supposed to be president. He really didn't win. Al Gore won that election. And all the aftermath of that, I think, would have been different had the correct winning president been in office at the time. He would have paid attention to the intel and would have had a plan in place. So people want to go off on January 6th talking about they were beat out of an election. We were actually beat out of an election, and we never stormed the Capitol. So, but you know, we just took it like, this is America. Sometimes they beat you out of stuff. We're just gonna complain and move on. So I'm glad that now this has been a move that they've taken. We've been in Afghanistan a long time. And
Yes.
So we'll see what the end result is. But right now, I'm happy that the move was made.
Quick take, Ed Sanders.
I'm glad that you have it up high in the rankings. The amount of money and resources that this country has devoted to this war, and I don't know that I would call it a war, other than what we were doing over there was violent. Um, it highlighted that for 20 years we really didn't have a strategic plan, that we jumped in there out of sort of a bloodlust to find Osama bin Laden, and really there was no design to figure out what we needed to do once that mission was accomplished. And we languished there. I think a lot of people feel desensitized to this issue, right? I think a lot of people wouldn't really rank it that high, but when you start to look at the end cost to our kids, our grandkids, in terms of the amount of resources that we put forward, this was significant. I'm glad we were able to pull out of Afghanistan, but I think at some point we will have a reckoning with the number of lives that we took in Afghanistan as Americans and the reasons why we did that.
Dr. OJ.
Well, again, I think it's important to remember that the Afghanistan war, both by President Bush and by President Obama, was considered to be the just war. The purpose of going into Afghanistan was to set up a base so that we could have a launching point if we needed to be anywhere else in Asia. It's similar to how we posted troops in Germany and in Japan after World War II. So we have kept our troops in places for a long time. This is a historic thing that the United States does. So in that perspective, it wasn't different. What was different, again, I think was what was pointed out, was that there wasn't really a strategic mission that folks were aware of over time. And as a result, you had former President Trump decide that he wanted to get troops out, and then Biden certainly rushed it, and that was an abysmal failure there at the end. But it does, I think, take looking at over the course of 20 years, which will probably take the next 20 or 50 years to sort through.
Are you ready for the number one story of 2021? That's next when we continue. Welcome back to Business of Being Black with Tammi Mack. I'm Dominique DePrima in for Tammi. We have finally reached the end of our countdown. It's the new year, and it's the top 10 stories of 2021, our number one story of the whole year. On January 6th, armed Trump supporters stormed the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., as Congress was in session in the midst of certifying Joe Biden's election as the next president of the United States. Since then, hundreds have been sentenced, and the January 6th committee continues to investigate who was involved in the planning and facilitation of this attack, as we're now about a week away from the one-year anniversary of the January 6th insurrection. Let's look at our thoughts on where this investigation stands, where it's going, and what this means for American democracy. Dr. O.J. Oleka.
Well, I think our democracy is strong. Obviously, when you have an event like January 6th and what those folks attempted to do, you could think the opposite. But the fact that our nation has rallied, the fact that we've had successful elections across the country since then, and special elections and statewide elections, and we have accepted those results, I think things are strong. I've been on the record saying that I wish that this particular committee would have looked at political violence in a broader perspective. But again, any of the folks who are involved in the January 6th activities, I think they need to be sentenced. I think they need to go to prison because what they tried to do was to destroy our democracy and to undermine fair and free elections in this country.
Yeah, but I mean, meanwhile, all across the country, while we're accepting those results, Republicans are putting in place laws and commissions, that will undermine future voting results. So I think, it's too early to say whether or not there's the lasting damage in place from this attack. Alicia, what are you thinking about this? Some people say, as Dr. OJ said, we should be looking at both sides. But as far as I know, both sides did not try to overthrow the government.
Yeah, this isn't a both sides argument. This is a one side that acted crazy. And I'm wondering why it's taking this long to even get these results. Had this been BLM or the Black Panthers, they would immediately jumped into place trying to find out who did what, when it started, when did they know what they knew, and it would have all heck would have broken loose, and it would have looked like Kent State out there. They wouldn't have been begging them, please don't beat me. They would have it wouldn't have. The whole setup was off. They knew that this type of stuff was in the works. They did nothing. In Seattle, you have cops that are undercover in BLM marches and protests. Why weren't cops undercover here? So it's like it's two different systems of justice, two different Americas. We all know it. January 6th just basically brought that to the forefront. Nobody can deny it now. And the sentences that these people are getting is far too light. They're giving these guys $500 fines, and if you don't give them full jail sentences, hit them hard in their pocket to deter the others. It's a joke. And the main one who set it off is not in any trouble at all. He's going to be the one that walks away with no punishment. And that's really the irony of it all. They're running around doing all this stuff for a man who's not going to get in any trouble, while they're getting at least some form of consequences. And not all of them are getting consequences. And the few that's getting consequences, a $500 fine, really? That's what you're giving the man who took Nancy Pelosi's lectern. That's what he's getting, $500. Like it's insulting. It's insulting to try to undermine our democracy and really get a slap on the wrist. It would not have happened if the group of people that did this looked differently, looked like me.
Congresswoman Cori Bush is suggesting that to honor the 1-year anniversary of the January 6th insurrection, we ought to fire all of the people in Congress who helped plan it or fan the flames. And Alicia's saying that the 45th president won't see consequences. Ed, will we ever see real consequences for those lawmakers that participated? And what are your general thoughts about the January 6th?
As January 6th occurred in the follow-up, I think, we tended to look at a couple different things. One, the presence of the Confederate flag, right, and how prominent that was amongst those supporters walking in. I think it was teased in one of the photos. I've often thought that we've been fighting the Civil War for quite some time. That this Confederate ideology still remains prevalent. That had to be dealt with, and January 6th was a very real display of that base's ability to, honestly try to overthrow the government. It raised questions for me on use of force, to Alicia's point. Had that been, any other sort of group, particularly African-American group, I don't think there would have been this pause on use of force. I still can't believe that, the Speaker of the United States, the third in line, and the Vice President were under that much duress, and there was not a use of force call. It's mind-boggling. You would be shocked if the president was in that building and we didn't deploy use of force. But there's always sort of this acceptance amongst that base. And then, as we try to figure out what went on, look, we all know what went on. I don't know why this is taking a year. We're almost at the anniversary, and, they're talking about subpoenas and other foolishness. And it's like, man, either get it or don't. And they're allowing people to thumb their nose at the Congress, throw them in jail. If you've got some teeth to your power, use it. But all of this duration of time that we have to deal with this is it's too much.
Yeah, but that said, at least new information is coming out. So before we head into 2022, let's remember some of the people we lost this year, including Cicely Tyson, Michael K. Williams, DMX, Jackie Avant, Colin Powell, Paul Mooney, Biz Marquis, and Archbishop Desmond Tutu. I want to ask you each, what is one memory that you have of someone on that list that will stay with you forever? OJ?
Well, I have to go with Colin Powell. Of course, he was the most prominent Black Republican that I had seen in my lifetime, that carried himself with distinction and served our country in such an incredible way, and he will be missed.
Ed?
I would probably echo that. Colin spoke at my graduation delivered my commencement address. And I remember at the time being disappointed that the Howard University had chosen him. It was 94. And so, it wasn't as though he was the ideal choice. But I thought he delivered a fantastic speech. It was a message that was well received. I think after his passing, you saw a lot of people quote that commencement address. And it really shined a light for me on the type of man he was and, the type of American that he was.
Alicia Cooper.
I would have to be Paul Mooney. I was able to open for him in Washington, D.C., and he was just the funniest person and fearless. And I remember he was being interviewed by a reporter, and she had a perm in her hair. And he said, "Oh, yeah, you're definitely going to make it as a reporter." He said, "Because when the hair is relaxed, white people relax." He said, "When the hair is nappy, they are not happy."
Yeah, so many giants on that
Paul
list.
Mooney is going to be missed.
Indeed, Paul Mooney was actually a friend of mine, and I miss him a lot too. Cicely Tyson, a hero of mine, just the way she carried herself in the world, her artistry, along with her fearless political advocacy. But Archbishop Desmond Tutu was a game changer, not just for South Africa, but for the entire world in facing down racism, but doing it with humanity and doing it in a way that allowed people a way forward. I want to thank my co-hosts, Alicia Cooper, Dr. OJ Oleka, and Ed Sanders. Happy New Year, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. We will see you in 2022. Stay tuned for TGIF. Bye, y'all.